So, Craig, let's talk about John's Gospel. You're a Johannine scholar. You spent a lot of time with John.
That was my dissertation area.
Is that right? What was your dissertation?
My dissertation was the function of Johannine pneumatology in the context of late first century Judaism.
Okay.
So
A bestseller.
Yeah, exactly. The theme of the Spirit in John's Gospel in light of Jewish understanding of the Spirit and in light of what was going on in, you could say, Jewish-Christian relations at that time, or that's not quite accurate, but something like that.
How long did it take? I know you're doing Johannine studies all along and your doctoral studies, but when you decided to write a commentary on John, how long did it take? Research and writing together?
I'm not sure. That took a few years. I started it, and then the opportunity arose to do a commentary on Matthew. So I stopped John, went to Matthew, came back to John, and by the time I came back to John, I had more experience commentary writing. So my actual commentary on John is probably a bit less abstruse than the introduction.
Okay. Now, if someone, someone could read Matthew 5 times, and then read Mark 4 times, and then read Luke 5 times, each of them 5 times, and they're going to notice a significant amount of overlap in the material. And Jesus sounds pretty much the same in all 3, and he says pretty much the same in all 3, using pretty much the same words in all 3 a lot. You come to John, though, and you read John 5 times right after reading each of the synoptics 5 times, and you're going, man, okay, he sounds a lot different in John than he sounds in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Not necessarily, I mean, we still get a high Christology, and I think you get a really high Christology in the synoptics, just like you have in John. But he sounds different. Very different. You go to 1 John, you read it 5 times, and you go, wow, Jesus in John sounds a lot like John in 1 John.
Yeah.
Sounds very different than, well, why is this?
Well, I mean, you have it even in Thucydides, for example. I mean, even though the ideal is to render people's words, even in history, in the way you thought it was most likely that they spoke in giving a speech. Thucydides' speeches, most of them sound like Thucydides, because people didn't always, I mean, they would often recount it in their own words. So it's not surprising John recounts things in his own words. He may have been influenced by Jesus' style of speaking, though, at the same time. I mean, you have, some people call it the Johannine bolt. There's a passage in Matthew and Luke.
11:27, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah. And in Luke, that's very, Luke 10, what's commonly called Q material, whether not everybody believes in it, majority of us do, but although maybe, I'm not sure what percentage. But in any case, Jesus apparently does speak like that sometimes, and if John picks that up and becomes his own style, and you have that developed all the way through. So sometimes it's hard to tell when Jesus stops speaking, and
like in John 3, right?
Yeah,
Who's saying, for God so loved the world, right?
That's the question about where it stops, yeah. Or when John the Baptist stops speaking later on in John 3.
F.F. Bruce, in his commentary on John, the Gospel and Epistles of John, he makes a statement. He talks about what Shakespeare does with Plutarch's Life of Brutus. And then he basically compares that with what John does with the Jesus tradition. And in essence, he's saying with them that when we are reading the Jesus tradition in John, John has given us an expanded paraphrase an expanded paraphrased, a translation of the freest kind, a transposition into another key, and much more. What do you think of that statement?
Yeah, I think that John he's giving us the meaning of what Jesus' message was. So it's not verbatim. It's not meant to be verbatim. It wasn't expected to be verbatim. But John, well, I take the author to be the beloved disciple. So he's somebody who was close to Jesus, rested his head on his bosom. The way people would recline, they'd recline their feet pointing away from the table. They'd recline on their left elbow, and so, like, say you're to my right, you're there, and I would be here, so I could lean back on your chest. That's the position that the beloved disciple was in. So intimate position with Jesus, and he knew him really well, and so he's in a position where people would welcome him to elucidate Jesus' meaning, to expound Jesus, what Jesus meant by this.
How free do you see, John? In your commentary, you say that all Johannine scholars acknowledge, or all scholars acknowledge Johannine adaptation.
Yeah, and Johannine idiom. Now, John's way of speaking. Now, that's not Bruce's example of Shakespeare's adaptation. I mean, Shakespeare way.
And he isn't the only one to do
Yeah.
that. I know Christopher Pelling compared Shakespeare's rendition of what Plutarch said. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I think Shakespeare probably went further than John would. I think an ancient analogy could be, you've got what Xenophon does with Socrates, you've got what Plato does with Socrates. What Plato does with Socrates is more like what John does with Jesus. But again, I don't think he goes as far as Plato does. But Plato was trying to bring out the meaning of Socrates' teaching that he gave on various occasions.
Interested. Do you think, what do you think about, and I know there's debate over this, what's your personal thoughts on some of the I am sayings in John? Do you think Jesus uttered them as, I mean, certainly he said some things to that extent. I mean, virtually all the I am sayings, the message that's communicated in the, like the I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me. That same message pretty much is communicated in the Johannine Thunderbolt in the Matthew 11, Luke 10, or Luke, was it 10? So, but what do you think, had we been there, would we have heard Jesus say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me?
Am I wrong that it's Luke 10? Anyway.
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, so I don't know if it would be, it doesn't have to be precise wording, but the idea that Jesus wouldn't say I am, I mean, you already have in Mark, when Jesus is walking on the water, which is pretty spectacular to begin with, but when he declares ego eimi, I am, and in the context here he is walking on the waves, he's about to pass them by. Mark has all these allusions to a theophany. This is God.
Yeah, and Richard Hayes brings this out in what is it? Reading Scripture Backward, I think is the name of the book, where he talks about this. I think it's kind of interesting. The question would be, okay, Jesus is walking on water. I have no problem with that. If he's the Son of God, walking on water is no big deal for him. The intending to pass them seems to be alluding
that's
to
Mark,
to the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Where God passes them, and it's in the same book as God walks on water, right?
You've got,
isn't it Isaiah or one of those?
Well, you've got Exodus where you have I am, and the passing by are both in the same book. Exodus 3 and then Exodus 33. maybe 33 and 34, especially 33, but also in Job chapter 9, the
Yeah,
passing
Job.
by and the treading on the waters.
Yep.
So
But the thing is Mark playing a little bit with things here? The ego me, I mean, does that work in Aramaic as well? In the same sense, Christological, divine sense that Mark is communicating here?
I haven't looked at it.
Or could
That's a
Mark be
good
doing
question.
some things to, bring out, attention to the fact he is walking on water, something which Job says this is what God does?
Hmm.
Seemed to me that might be what Hayes was saying there. I don't know that he's denying the historicity of Jesus intending to pass by them and saying, ego me, but could that be part of the story that Mark has crafted in there in order to highlight the essence of Jesus walking on water? If that's what's going on, then John could be doing some of the same stuff.
It could be.
I
But,
know some of this is just unknowable.
but I don't think, I think John knew about Mark, but I don't think John is drawing on Mark. So if they're both independently coming up with Jesus speaking in those ways, I suspect that Jesus probably sometimes did speak in those ways.
Mhm.
It's interesting, in John 8:58, "Prin Abram genesthai ego eimi," before Abraham was, I am. You can see why people were ready to stone him in the next verse. But I think Dodd, and I think probably going back before Dodd, some scholars have pointed out on the Festival of Tabernacles that the priests would utter something like that in the temple, so that it actually fits the context, the temporal context in which Jesus was speaking. I'm not 100% persuaded in that particular allusion to the Feast of Tabernacles. The rabbinic text, I think, can be construed in more than one way. It is Tannaitic, so it's in the earlier stratum of rabbinic literature, but there are reasons to believe that Jesus sometimes did speak that way, and some of them can fit the immediate context. What you bring up, though, about the Aramaic, I'll have to look at that, because most likely Jesus did speak to them. I think most people in Lower Galilee were bilingual, but when Jesus is just speaking to his disciples, probably he was more often speaking Aramaic than Greek.
Yeah. What about the sayings on the cross? They're different
Mhm.
than what we find in the Synoptic Gospels. Now, a lot of times a pastor will try to say, okay, these are the 7 last sayings of Jesus, and you've got those in the Synoptics, and then you combine it with those in John. But those that are in the Synoptic Gospels are not found in John, and those that are found in John are not found in the Synoptics. They are both unique. But yet you'll have Jesus said this is his last statement, and then he died, and it's different. And what do you think's going on in John?
Luke actually is different also.
Mm-hmm.
And there are reasons for that. Actually, let me do Luke first,
Okay.
because that helps set things up for this. So Jesus says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit."
This is Luke.
Yeah. In Luke 23. And I think it's one of them is 34, one of them is 46. And he also says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And you got the first martyr in Acts chapter 7, Stephen. He makes pretty much the same kind of statements, which is natural that you're going to follow in the steps of your Lord. But it's Luke who highlights that parallel. Luke loves parallels among figures. Now, should we assume from that Luke makes up what Jesus said based on his knowledge of Stephen? Or could Luke really know that was said? What's interesting there is that scholars have sometimes pointed out that there was a prayer that was offered about that time of day by Jewish people, or many Jewish people, in Judea at least, which is appropriate, Judea and Galilee. From the Psalms, I commit my spirit, or I commit myself to you, hand myself over to you. And so it could well be that's echoing something Jesus actually said, that Luke, it says he has sources going back to eyewitnesses, so why not? Luke probably didn't know that tradition.
Mm-hmm.
He's more likely to know sayings of Jesus than Judean tradition that wasn't probably even in Greek.
Mm-hmm.
I think with John, you've got the beloved disciple emphatically saying he was there. So he emphasized that point especially for the blood and the water.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's a reason for John to emphasize that, because you've got this water motif going through the whole gospel. The climax is there, but I think that John, he's so emphatic, I don't think he's making it up. I think just he has the reason to mention it. The others, they had other things they wanted to emphasize. Now, none of the gospel writers after Mark wanted to end it like Mark. I mean, Matthew does follow him on the my God, why have you forsaken me, Psalm 22. But Mark is just dismal. And I think Mark is, it's like certain psalms are so depressing that you only want to pray them when you're really depressed. Otherwise, they'll get you down.
Mm.
But if you're depressed, it's like, that's what I need to pour out my heart to God.
Mm.
And I think Mark was addressing an audience like that. And it's much more triumphant in John. I mean, John doesn't report Jesus in Gethsemane praying the prayer there, but he does say something like that, in John 12. But then when Mark, my God, why have you forsaken me? John chapter 16, I know that you're always with me. So I'm not saying that John didn't have real information. I'm saying that John is giving a different aspect to the story. And so, and the message in John, his climactic words, John 19:30, it is finished. It's a cry more of triumph, because, the agony's over, and also the mission is complete. And John likes to have plays on words. So, he breathed his last. You have that in other Gospels, gave up the Spirit. But in John, it could be translated, he gave the Spirit. Just like you have in John 7:37 to 39, where in verse 39 it says the Spirit was not yet given because Jesus was not yet glorified. Well, in John, he's glorified, he's lifted up on the cross, crowned King of the Jews, and his side is pierced, the water flows out. 7:37 to 39 said, rivers of living water will flow from his belly. There's so many plays and words there in Greek.
So he's trying to give us a picture of some things.
Yes.
You're not suggesting.
I'm not saying he's making it up.
Right.
But saying
he's trying to draw some parallels. What do you think about? And we'll end with this. What do you think about when a resurrection appearance, he breathes on them and says, "Receive the Holy Spirit"? What do you think's going on there?
I think they would pick this up too, but Genesis 2:7, God breathed into Adam the breath of life. Mm-hmm. And also you have in John 3, you've got an allusion when he speaks of that which is born of the Spirit is Spirit. You've got an allusion there, and born of water and the Spirit, and then that which is born of the Spirit is Spirit. You've got allusion to Ezekiel 36, where God would cleanse them with pure water. He would put a new spirit within them. He would put his own Spirit within them. Well, those who are good with math know that right after chapter 36 comes 37. 37, 1 to 14, the Spirit is portrayed in that chapter not so much in terms of water, but in terms of wind or breath. Mm-hmm. And so in John 3:8, Jesus tells Nicodemus, the wind, you don't know where it comes from or where it's going, but you hear the sound of the wind.
Oh, okay, but what do you think?
But wait.
Okay.
But but it could also be translated the voice of the Spirit. So in John 20, when he breathes on them, I think there's an allusion to Genesis 2:7, an allusion to Ezekiel 37, and you've already been set up for that earlier in the gospel.
So what about Pentecost?
Well, I think Pentecost is where they experience the fullness of that. So John isn't going to continue his narrative chronologically that far. So this has to fulfill the function of that, and it does fulfill the function. I mean, you look at the Paraclete sayings in John.
So are there two occasions here?
I think there are two, but I don't think that's John's point, and I don't think that's Luke's point. I mean, I do think he breathed on them, but...
You think he breathes on them? Did they receive the Holy Spirit at that point in John before Pentecost?
Yes, but I don't think they received the fullness of it yet. I think Matthew 10:20, when he sent them out, he says, the Spirit of your Father speaking in you. They were already equipped with the Spirit at that point. But each writer, we have to take them on their own terms first. I'm ordained Baptist, but experientially I'm Pentecostal, so I have no problem with multiple experiences of the Spirit. But in terms of what John's emphasizing, his promise of the Paraclete, he talks about peace, talks about joy, talks about when I come to you, and all those things that he talks about in chapters 14 through 16 with the Spirit, they come to their climax, the pneumatological climax there, just like you have the climax of the Christological confessions, behold the Lamb of God, the Holy One of God. Well, finally you've got my Lord and my God in John 20:28. A lot of themes climax there. That's why chapter 21 is anticlimactic, although I would say that, because a lot of people think it was written separately or by somebody else, even though the vocabulary isn't clear about that, except for certain terms that you wouldn't expect, fishing terms and stuff. But the most widely read work of Greek antiquity by far was the Iliad, and chapter 24 is anticlimactic. So I have no problem with somebody writing an anticlimactic chapter after they finish the rest of it. But it's just brilliant how John ties things together, and we don't need to sacrifice that literary brilliance to say that the beloved disciple actually was there and had some things to tell us. A number of Johannine scholars do believe that the beloved disciple actually was an eyewitness, and a minority of us actually think it was John.
So all right, one more thing and then we have to close.
Okay.
So I think you remembered, majority of scholars in terms of the author of John's Gospel, I remember you telling me, you'd say the majority of today's scholars would say that John, the son of Zebedee, did not write the Gospel. You're one of the minority.
I'm in the minority. Yeah.
But the majority of scholars do think that the author of John's Gospel was either a minor disciple of Jesus, an eyewitness, or, even more so, the author's primary source was one of Jesus's eyewitness disciples, perhaps even John, the son of Zebedee.
More often said to be a different John, because
Okay.
they're trying to work with church tradition. But yes,
Okay.
but I think the majority would say that there's an eyewitness tradition behind the fourth gospel, and that's why he can go his own way, why he can get away with going his own way, because he also is an eyewitness.
Excellent. So for more on Craig's views of John and just great exposition of John's Gospel, grab his 2-volume commentary on the Gospel of John. Or you can do, what's that?
Just going to say that there's also a newer one, which is just background.
Okay.
Zondervan's Bible Backgrounds commentary, I did the revised version of John in there.
There you go. That's more like the Reader's Digest version, I guess,
Yeah.
than yours.
For
right?
the background, yeah.
There you go. Craig Keener, thanks for, it's great to spend some time with you again, Craig.
Great to be with you, brother.
Yeah, man.
Sorry for interrupting you too much.
No, not at all. Thank you for joining me in this series. There's much more to come. If you enjoy the research, writing, and videos I'm producing, consider becoming a patron of this ministry. Visit my brand new Patreon page at the link in the upper right of this video. You can give as little as $5 a month. Thank you.